Please imagine a horse, its flesh flayed from its body, leaving nothing but exposed muscle. Attached to its back is a human torso, its skin peeled off just the same, with arms that reach the ground, and upon its shoulders an overgrown head. It stalks the ocean waters of the Orkney Islands of northern Scotland in search of land-dwelling prey, its presence able to strike fear into anyone, especially those that know what monsters the sea has in store for us all. What you have just witnessed is the Nuckelavee. The story of the Nuckelavee can be seen in plenty of northern European cultures, having been brought up by the Norse and Celts, but is somewhat different for those that live on the Orkney Islands. We at the Black Index recognize that with the shifting of information over cultures, and especially decades, stories tend to change. Based upon our classification list, you'd be tempted to cite this monster as a novel manifestation, but you'd be wrong. The Black Index realizes the frustration in this, seeing as the Nuckelavee seems to be story-dependent, as novel manifestations are, but that simply isn't the case. A Nuckelavee is something more complicated, something known as a fae. These adaptable creatures are mostly a mystery to society, but we still hold some information on such apparitions, even though most people would only think of them as merely stories. I have no doubt that we all have been told fairy tales and ghost stories when we were younger, and no doubt some part of those stories have stuck around with us as we got older. Perhaps they didn't define us, but in some way they made an impact, clutching onto our heels like screaming children. If you were to look back on these stories with questions, I'd imagine most of you would ask, why would these people and creatures be so dangerous and harmful? For example, the old story of Rumpelstiltskin. What would an impish fiend need with the firstborn? Or, how about the story of the Pied Piper? With a man wielding so much power with just a simple flute, why steal the whole town's children? It might seem silly to ponder over such questions pertaining to children's stories, but we at the Black Index are no strangers to what lies beyond the curtain. The truth of these stories is based more in reality than you'd think. The deeds of most legends, such as these, go beyond the thought process of the average human. To hit at the core of their lives for why they commit such heinous acts is truly well and beyond anyone's pay grade, disregarding your high and mighty literature professor's declarations. Their reasoning is beyond our mindsets, because they are not of our world. They are of something else, something more confounded and parasitic, a world we have seen, recorded, and told to children for the same reason we tell children stories of novel manifestations, to warn them of the dangers of this world. They may not understand when they are young, but it'll ingrain within them, giving them some phantom knowledge they might need in the future. The Fae are the same matter as you and me, yet they differ in every way. The Nuckelavee's poison breath is cited as the cause of many droughts upon the fields and farms of the Orkney Islands. It is also considered the source of the many deaths of horses on the Isles with a disease known as the Mortenshen, now known as glanders. And to drive home just how poisonous the land can be for our equine friends, there hasn't been a horse on the islands since they were killed in a massive thunderstorm upon being mysteriously let loose from their stables. With the tumultuous waves that crash upon the jagged rocks of the Isles, the dangers of the sea only linger on the minds of the citizens. And when the Norse and Celts had spread their tales of monsters like the Kelpie from just beyond those terrible waters, what could the people think but attribute their woes to monsters like the Nuckelavee? Both are aquatic, bringing danger to those who come near, spreading dissent and terror. And it's here that we see the connections. The people of the Orkney Islands saw similarities in the monsters of those who came by boat and the monsters of their humble isles. It's here that we see the adaptability of the Fae. They can change, morphing their physical appearance to make use of the lands that they dwell within.
Focus on the Nuckelavee. Keep the Fae out of this. Upper management has to renegotiate the contract now because of you.
What do you mean? What does this mean for me?
Just continue.
You should be on page 233 of your Black Index. A photograph of a shore covered in corpses is amongst a long account by Timothy visiting from Michigan on a trip to see the home of his grandmother. Based on what we found of Timothy, the man was very interested in his heritage, having received his BA in Anglo-Saxon history and mythology. He had graduated from university with his master's in philosophy and would be continuing his education, but not before visiting where his blood had began. Based upon the account, Timothy was initially supposed to attend a week-long trip to northern Scotland as part of his senior thesis, but was unable to based upon his grandmother's request, then her eventual demise. She had initially warned him of her old home to never visit because of the terrible memories she sustained from her abusive father. She said that that country had a curse upon it. Even from a young age, he was deterred from looking into his own heritage, but that never stopped him, and if it weren't for her death, he most likely would have gone. He held an ounce of resentment towards her, feeling for just a moment that this was her way of making him promise not to see Scotland. And while most of the rest of the family knew this, Timothy was kept blind to the fact that her autopsy showed that she had ate rat poison, causing her brutal death. Take that for what you will, dear listener. After another 2 years of study, another degree under his belt, working his way towards a doctorate, and eventually obtaining what was promised to him by his department, Professor of Anglo Literature, he decided to break his vow. He was going to Scotland no matter what. He viewed it as a pilgrimage to throw away the past and work towards a better future. His body was found 2 weeks after his departure on the shorelines of Mullhead in the Gloop, a chasm within the Mullhead Nature Reserve. Based on the decomposition, it's currently unknown as to when he died. During those 2 weeks, a series of rainstorms led to flooding, resulting in the mass death of cattle and drowning crops. These were sporadic and seemingly otherworldly, as after each storm, random assortments of items ranging from couch chairs to waterlogged televisions washed ashore. Eventually, 13 bodies were brought onto the beaches near Mullhead. They were of varying ethnic and racial backgrounds, each one a missing person from the larger Scotland area, and each one with hoofprints upon their heads and chest. With the appearance of these people, this led to an investigation of the Orkney Islands. Questioning of the population started on, with many people saying these poor folk should have stayed far away from the water, that their death was of their own doing if the water took them. More than half of those that made such claims followed up with a warning of something riding out in the storm, some figure clopping on the wet earth, screaming as if they were burning alive. They made out a horse and a rider, and they all made the observation that whoever rode upon that steed had a head beyond typical measure with arms that seemed to drop to the ground. Each of them made no further comment on this once the police came back for further questioning. The matter was dropped when it was found out by higher command that this story was mainly told by the elderly of the islands, connecting such horror stories to their corroded old minds. It was only when the investigators went back for further questioning that they came upon the Gloop, where they found the chasm nearly filled with rank water, dead fish, and the body of Timothy. The cause of the death has been linked to drowning. Based upon his broken legs, it is assumed that he fell into the chasm, only to be drowned by the storms that followed. What has been in question, though, much like the other poor people that were found on those foreboding shores, was how exactly he managed to be covered in hoofprints. The stories we tell each other are meant to make sense of the world. Whether they have any semblance of rational thought is up to the time period and the people that are willing to tell their history. What people fail to understand is that myth is the line that separates the reality we know and the one we rarely notice. Just because we have never seen a tree fall doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Certain folk of the cloth will say seeing is believing, but for faith, believing is seeing. What we see with this reality that we present to you at the Black Index is only more evidence that not only is the world gray in terms of morals, but also in terms of reality. Everything exists because we have subconsciously allowed it to, but everything else has always existed. We just decided it didn't fall neatly into our purview, and that'll be our downfall. Our own inability to accept the midnight summer's dream of our world caused us to fail to at least look for the signs of what lies underneath the filmy caps of water.
Get on with it.
Keep clear of deep waters, listeners, especially if it's near dry land. And make sure to pray to whatever god it is you believe in when you enter the forest, because you might need it.
Shut it off.